In 1995, the Russell family, Doctors Sean and Lin Russell, their daughters Megan 6 and Josie 9, made the difficult decision to leave the beautiful Nantil Valley on the edge of the Snowdonia National Park to start a new life in a picturesque village in Kent, where the father, Sean Russell, had been offered a lecturing job at the university. They were happy. In fact, Sean commented, they had a lovely existence. The girls had settled into school, and Lin, 45, who had had a successful career as a geologist lecturer in Africa, was more than happy to devote her time to her family. She delved into looking after the home, spending time renovating the cottage and its garden. Unfortunately, on July the 9th, 1996, their idyllic life would be shattered. On a beautiful summer's morning, they readied themselves for the day. They ate breakfast on the patio while the birds sang in the trees. Sean, who was taking the children to school that morning in the car, kissed his wife at the cottage door, and she watched as they left. Nothing seemed odd on that day, and why would it? It was just a normal day in their lives. Arriving at the school, Sean hugged the girls, kissed them goodbye as they ran into the school. 9-year-old Josie had made some close friends in the short time she was there, and her school teachers were impressed at her bubbly nature and happy outlook. Megan was apparently a little more reserved in nature, but was a very sweet and happy girl. Towards the end of the school day, Lynn set off with their dog Lucy to get the girls. The couple of miles walk was a usual walk for them, down a dirt path named Cherry Garden Lane, with cornfields on one side and woods on the other. A beautiful and picturesque walk, especially with the sun shining down on the fields, giving the corn a more golden glow. Lynn had told Sean the girls were going to Brownie's after school, so he wasn't surprised when he returned home later that evening to an empty house. A little while later, the friend who was taking Lynn and the girls to Brownie's called Sean to ask if everything was okay, as she couldn't get a reply after trying twice at the cottage earlier, and they hadn't shown up for Brownie's. He began to worry. This was unusual for them. As time went on, he grew more frantic and called the police to see if there had been an accident, as he couldn't locate his wife and daughters. They informed him there hadn't been any accidents. He didn't know what else to do, so he got in his car and drove the route they would walk by the lane. He couldn't see anything. Returning back to the cottage, he hoped they had returned while he'd been out looking, but nothing. He called the vets in case something had happened to the dog, Lucy, and they had had to take her there. He called hospitals, frantically trying to find his family. He couldn't do any more and called the police back. Unknown to Sean, the police had already started to look for Lynn and the girls, as the earlier call had concerned them. Before he knew it, the police were there, dog handlers with their dogs, and many police officers spread out and started combing the countryside for his missing family. By 11:30, Sean saw the look on the police officer's face as he walked into his home, and he knew whatever had happened wasn't good. The officer went on to tell Sean his family had been killed. It hadn't taken the police dogs long to find Lynn and the girls, as they were only a few hundred metres away from the house, down the country lane they had walked so many times. Lynn, Josie, Megan and their dog Lucy had been viciously attacked and left for dead in the bushes at the side of the path. They had been tied up with strips from the damp towels the girls had used for swimming earlier. They were blindfolded before being bludgeoned to death with a claw hammer. The attacker attacked them one by one, including the dog. The scene was horrific. It was so bad the police were sure they were all dead. But a few hours later, Sean was told by a liaison officer that one of his daughters had miraculously survived. Dr. Lin Russell, not knowing which of his daughters had managed to cling to life, went to the hospital and immediately knew it was his daughter Josie. Josie Russell fought for her life with her grieving father by her bedside. The next day, the village was overrun with media. There was a frenzy in the village, and the people were shocked and afraid. Forensics, police, and media all converged at the same time. While the police looked for any other witnesses, the crucial main witness, young Josie, was slowly coming round. They didn't know if she would be able to tell them anything. She might not remember or even be able to communicate in any way at all. Her brain may well be too damaged. After surgical treatment and with help from therapists, Josie managed to work with the liaison officers, who tried with great care and thoughtfulness to help her build up to what happened on that awful day. Meanwhile, the police had found some evidence in the woods. Some bloodied pieces of towel and a bootlace were found, and a hammer found near the scene. But there was nothing to prove it was the weapon. The victim's blood was on the cloth. A bloody fingerprint was found on Josie's lunchbox, and some hairs were found that didn't belong to the victims. A woman came forward telling the police she had seen a man on that day while she drove on the adjacent road near the area the family was found. She said he was in a beige car and seemed angry as he kept looking at her. Another witness saw a man holding a claw hammer and looked agitated. He wasn't in a car. Another witness also saw a beige car, thought to be a Ford Escort. Months passed and Josie had returned to school, but the tranquil life they had once led had gone. Dr. Russell decided to return to Wales with Josie. The hunt for the killer continued. It was a year later, and eventually, with the evidence they had gathered, along with information they had received from Josie as her healing and communication skills improved, they were able to piece together what had happened that day. They had been walking home down the lane when a car drove past them, and Josie waved to the driver. As they walked further down the lane, they found the same car was parked across the track, and the driver, a man, got out of the car with a hammer in his hand. He demanded cash from the family, but Lin had left her money and purse at home. She offered to go back to the house with him to give him money, but he said no. Lin told Josie to run to the nearest house to get help, but he grabbed her and hit her over the head with the hammer. She was injured, but not badly. The worst was about to come. The family and the dog were then walked into a dense area of trees, where they were tied up by the attacker with strips torn from Josie's blue swimming towel and a bootlace. He then launched a brutal and frenzied attack on Lin, striking her on the head at least 15 times, bludgeoning her to death. Her terrified young daughters were forced to witness this. Josie's head was then smashed in, while Megan had been hit at least 7 times, suffering massive skull fractures. The hunt was intensified, and a year later another appeal was launched with a photo-fit picture of the man they wanted to talk to. The appeal was televised on the TV show Crime Watch. A psychiatric nurse, a psychiatrist, and other medical staff who saw the appeal on the television thought they might have some information about a former patient who had once viciously attacked members of staff, threatening to kill people and their families, and had shown violent behaviour towards his probation officer, threatening to kill him. He had also apparently told of fantasising about killing children and torturing people. The name Michael Stone was put forward to the police as a possible suspect, and armed with this new knowledge, they began an extensive investigation looking into all aspects of Stone's life. What they discovered would eventually lead to Stone's arrest. Stone's childhood, like many others, was traumatic, growing up in a dysfunctional family where apparently DV was prevalent. He had been beaten with a hammer and witnessed his mother's partner attack someone with a cleaver. His drug use had started apparently around the age of 9, and in 1972, by the age of 12, he was caught for theft and taken into care, where he was apparently abused. On leaving care, he fell into the world of heroin, where the £1,500 habit took him further down the dark path of destruction. The carrying of weapons such as knives, a gun, even putting ammonia in a squeezy bottle to squirt into someone's face went along with his arrests, and served prison time in the 1980s and 90s for grievous bodily harm, actual bodily harm, robbery and burglary to apparently feed his expensive habit. His exploits gave him some clout in Kent's Medway underworld. The attacks that led to his prison terms included attacking someone with a hammer, stabbing a man while he slept, almost killing him, and 2 armed robberies. His extremely violent nature, whether through drugs or not, led him to spend over 16 years in prison. He was also apparently violent to his partners, causing injuries so bad that one of his partners went to the police where they took photographic evidence. Although she dropped the charges, it was still logged. Stone had allegedly blacked out and couldn't remember what he'd done. After Stone was released from prison in 1993, he was on probation. He had apparently had support for his drug addiction and mental health, but it became apparent his mental health problems were more severe, and by 1994 he was sectioned in a mental hospital in Leeds, where he was diagnosed with personality disorder and paranoid psychosis. Stone's treatment consisted of regular injections, but his continued use of heroin impeded his treatment. Eventually he was passed over to Kent's Health Authority, as Leeds had found him a danger to their staff, as previously mentioned. But it has been said he begged for help with his mental health, but because of his outbursts of violence, he was seen as dangerous. His mental health treatment would be examined and scrutinised at a later date. After the police had looked into all the new information on Stone, they finally had a motive, that being robbery. Although the amount of violence used in this attack didn't seem right, after hearing the witnesses' claims on Stone, it began to fit the scene. They had also surmised the killer might have lived close but not in the direct area because of the use of a car. Stone had denied knowing about the area, Chillenden, but his friends told them he knew the area like the back of his hand after spending 2 years in a children's home just 2 miles away. Why would Stone be in the area? Well, they could only conclude, as he lived 30 miles away, the quiet rural area would be rife to burgle sheds and homes away from busy streets. Although the witnesses spoke of a beige car, his friends did clarify Stone had owned a beige car before, but at that time owned and drove a white car. His friends also told the police Stone's clothes had blood on them, to which he told them it was from a fight he'd had. But there wasn't a scratch on him. They also noticed bloodstains on his toolbox in the car, but the friends, whose statements contradicted each other, were classed as unreliable. But Stone said himself he went on to change his clothes and later told the police he had burnt them. Stone had no alibi for that day, saying he couldn't remember where he was as he was in a haze of drugs. He could remember the week before and the day after the murders, but not the day of the murders. It was also apparently common knowledge that Stone always carried a hammer in his car. The blood-stained fingerprint wasn't Stone's. The hairs found didn't belong to anyone involved in the attack. It's thought that they could have come from the belongings of Josie after swimming. The bootlace that was apparently misplaced in evidence was examined, but no link to Stone was found. The hammer also found at the scene couldn't be identified as the hammer used. In fact, there was no forensic link to Stone at all. Eventually, after months of intense investigative work and a year after his arrest, Stone went to trial, charged with murder. Stone pleaded not guilty at his original trial in 1998, but his conviction was primarily based on the testimony from a witness, Damien Daly, who claimed that Stone had confessed to him while in prison during a conversation through a heating pipe at the back of their cells. Another two prisoners, Mark Jennings and Barry Thompson, also testified at the trial that Stone had dropped hints to them that he was involved in the murders, and he couldn't produce the clothes that he'd been wearing. He said that he'd burnt them as he'd gotten too fat for them. The case lay simply on circumstantial evidence. Knowing that the confession from Stone to Daly was also information found in the national press. Some evidence against Stone wasn't allowed to be used in court, such as statements from the psychiatrist and the nurses who had named Stone as a suspect, where it told of his violent nature and threats to kill. Also, his long record of violent crimes and severe mental health illness were not permitted. The jury took 2 days to find Stone guilty, and he was convicted to 3 life sentences for the murder of Lin Russell and Megan Russell, and attempted murder of Josie Russell. He was found guilty on 2 counts of murder and 1 count attempted murder. Stone has always maintained he's innocent. In 2001, the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial when 2 out of the 3 prisoners who claimed to have heard a confession from Stone admitted they had lied. It came to light that one of them had been paid a large amount of money by a tabloid newspaper for the story. Their statements were deemed unreliable. The jury in the new trial experienced the jail cell where it was claimed Stone made his confession to Daly to see if it was possible that he could actually hear him in the next cell. Whatever happened, the jury still found Stone guilty, and in less time than the first. In 2005, Stone's lawyers tried to appeal again, but it wasn't granted. And in 2006, a High Court judge decided that Stone should spend at least 25 years in prison before being considered for parole. Stone continues to argue that his conviction is a miscarriage of justice, on the grounds that the evidence against him came from another prisoner who was described as a career criminal and who the Crown acknowledged would lie when it suited him. Some members of his family, who first thought he was guilty, now believe he's innocent of this crime. Stone's legal team continues to fight for him and have argued that the serial killer, Levi Bellfield, could be responsible for the killings. But Bellfield's partner at the time insists he was with her that day, as it was her birthday. Her statement has been found credible, as she helped the police with the murders Bellfield was convicted of, and has apparently no reason to lie for him. Also, apparently, the Metropolitan Police had already looked into Bellfield for the murders, but couldn't find any evidence against him for the Russell murders. To this day, the argument of did Stone do this? Did the prison confession even happen? Was Levi Bellfield involved? Who has admitted and denied it numerous times? Continues. Recently, in February of 2022, Stone's solicitor, Paul Bacon, stated that Bellfield had confessed to the murders in a 4-page statement and claimed there were details only the killer would know. But Stone's legal team also stated that there was nothing in Bellfield's statement which was not already in the public domain, suggesting Bellfield could have made it using known evidence. Apparently, in the confession, Bellfield claims to have taken a hairband as a souvenir and that he had killed the dog after it bit him. He claims to have attacked the children when the screams became too much and Lin would fight harder for her children, as at first he was only going to kill Lin Russell. Former Chief Inspector Colin Sutton, who helped capture Bellfield, stated that he was sure Bellfield had carried out other attacks, but he stated, "Knowing Bellfield as I do, this could be him playing mind games." The did he, didn't he continues, but at the end of the day there are 2 people dead and 1 girl was seriously injured. A family's left grieving and a life had to be rebuilt. My thoughts and prayers go out to the Russell family. Thank you for watching.